everyone. My guests today are Mikaelian and Hattie Wilkinson of Sprout Social. Now, Tara and Hattie have had so many conversations with higher ed social media teams, and they have made many observations and have collected a lot of data. And they're here to tell us what they've learned. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager, a podcast that addresses the do's, don'ts, and dynamics of the digital ecosystem specific to higher education. I'm your host, Li Fowler. Join me every other week for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education social media management and marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager is a part of the Enrollify network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Tara and Hattie, welcome to the podcast. I am delighted to have you here with us.
We are so excited to be here.
Thank you so much.
So let's dive in because we're going to talk about data, particularly social media data. So let's start with, why is this even important? Why is social media data important?
That is such a good question. Obviously, the list of reasons of social data and its importance is so extensive, but I will tailor it down to just a few for today.
Thank you.
First and foremost, it allows social teams to illustrate the impact and the ROI of their work in a very tangible way and frame that impact in support of institutional goals. If we just think about it, right, social is the driver for demand generation, fueling applications, improving student and faculty retention, driving alumni donations, and so much more. It really connects the dots between engagement and measurable success in a way that traditional marketing channels simply just cannot match. Social is the public voice for any university and college, so it should be leveraged to earn yourself and your team really a bigger seat at the table. Second, I think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't acknowledge, right, there's been a huge shift in our culture, the way that people ingest information and make decisions, and really the rapid pace of it all. I think, Jenny, you know firsthand, trends and opinions are evolving so quickly. So the old-fashioned way of putting together a focus group or running a survey leave someone in a reactive position and really carrying out their strategy with outdated data and blinders on. And why would somebody do that when peer institutions are navigating really with eyes wide open and with a constant pulse in real-time data? So it's really just huge that social teams no longer have to rely on vague assumptions or their intuition to make educated guesses on what people care about and what makes their institution stand out or where their competitive advantages lie, because social data gives the facts, and those facts are incredibly powerful. The last thing that I will say is the real-time component of this data really enables teams to adapt quickly, whether it's seeing the initial responses and then tweaking messaging or doubling down on something that's resonating, making strategies and investments far more productive in driving institutional goals forward. So just to recap, not only does it empower you to tell on yourself in a good way for career advancement, strengthen cross-department collaboration, and justify advocacy for future resources, but it also arms you with a deep and fluid understanding of what's important to your audiences and leaves you agile to ensure your investments and strategies are always super impactful. So just a couple reasons why it's important.
Yeah, you gave us a lot to unpack there. That was definitely extensive. But I liked some of the things you said. I really liked how you said connecting dots. And I really liked it is sort of a real-time instant focus group. So we might not be able to have the resources or the time to get people in a room to ask them questions, but really this data is what is giving us people's opinions. And it's sort of like an immediate focus group, if you will. So Tara, I do feel like sometimes social media managers have trouble connecting the dots, right, from like what we do to the ROI or the analytics or metrics at the end of the day. So can you maybe give us like a story or a case study or like sort of a concrete example of how people have connected the two, like their social media to a broader institutional goal?
Yeah, to your point, I mean, there's so much data you're dealing with daily, right? Public opinions are changing so much, and social media managers have a million things at their plate on all time. So it can be really difficult to connect the dots. And part of that's because it's a constant, right? There are things like application goals, fundraising goals, there's leadership transitions, rebranding efforts, and you're moving a million miles an hour. So you can easily miss the opportunity to say, measure impact through metrics like ROI or monitor sentiment and feedback through these social messages. Two examples really come to mind. One is the University of South Carolina. They put together this incredible 2024 performance recap. I'm sure it was leveraged internally, but even more interestingly, they published it on LinkedIn, and we can provide the link just in case anyone wants to review this recap. But it really was the epitome of them telling on themselves in a good way. It not only displayed the incredible growth and outcomes that they had achieved over that past year, but it re-solidified their goals of thought leadership, of innovation, and really community building, highlighting things like their involvement in the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, and simultaneously calling out the amount of posts, engagements, and new followers fostered through that in-person experience. They also shared their #1 rival IQ ranking as the most engaging D1 social media program. So they really use their impact as an opportunity to amplify their expertise across audiences, whether they're peers looking up to their #1 position, current and prospective students were shown this feeling of community and support at South Carolina, really just creating the sense of trust and pride and really opportunity across their community. So that's definitely one that stands out to me. There's another great example with the University of Boulder, and when Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, also referred to as Coach Prime, joined their institution. Do you want me to go into that example just a little bit?
Yeah, let's hear it. We love concrete examples. Yeah.
Perfect. So Coach Prime had just taken over the football team. And naturally, their social media team, right, was monitoring social conversations to collect feedback and see how the community was initially responding to him and his joining, right, of Boulder. But they also took it as an opportunity to really zoom out and understand the trickle-down effect of the addition of Coach Sanders. And he had an incredible impact on things like ticket sales and donations and increased student applications. And really quickly through this data and monitoring these broader social conversations, they were able to understand and display how deep his impact was. So if listeners are looking to ingest yet another piece of information, there are so many documentaries on Coach Prime, and it's a really great story. But this just shows that he has not only led his team to success on the field, but it's also created greater visibility for the program and the impact of it, which can be amplified again and tracked through social.
Yeah, I really love those examples because, you're saying brand awareness is a goal, but then when you say, okay, we were in the Macy's Day Parade and that created this many pieces of earned media, you can actually connect the two, like goal to results. And
exactly.
It's so good, so important. So Hattie, let's get you in the conversation here. One thing that I've always liked to look at myself is like some of my worst performing content because I feel like I learn just as probably more from content that does not do well. So can you maybe talk to us about like some of the biggest mistakes you see us higher education social media managers making over and over again?
Yeah, well, I don't want to say there's any huge mistakes because we know we all are just trying our best out
I
there,
know,
and these
fair,
networks
True.
are changing so
fair.
often, and there's always so much going on. To your point, I agree. I think looking at your bottom performing content is one of those things that might not be the nicest thing to do as a social manager to see maybe where you flopped a little bit or you tried something and it didn't quite hit. So I think that's something that you can learn so much
So much.
from. But I do think one of the things that Tara and I hear over and over again of something that we think is truly a mistake that social managers are making is waiting for people to ask you for data, waiting for leadership to come to you and say, hey, what's performing well and what's not. I think that's the biggest mistake because, as Tara was saying previously, your social data is where you're proving the ROI of your
Yes.
own role. Your social
Yes.
data is where you're showing the ROI of how you're impacting the university as a whole. And that's really where we can't wait to ask or to have someone come to you and ask you for that data.
Yeah, I mean, I know that our listeners cannot see me, but I was slow clapping that because I believe that so much. And I mean, don't wait for people to ask you because a lot of times people might not know what to ask you. You know,
Right.
there's
That's
some
exactly it.
education there and they don't know what's available. So I think that when you provide data, you're also educating people of what you can show them. So I think that's really important. Tara, sorry, you look like you're want to jump in.
No, I will just double down on exactly what you said there, Jenny. I think the biggest problem when you aren't in the driver's seat, you're not sharing reports despite it not being asked for, is you're leaving social in a box. There's a broader understanding or perception of social's value internally, and it becomes limited to that. Because if you're not showing your impact through reporting proactively, there isn't an understanding of what is possible. So then when it comes to asking for resourcing or even just trying to push forward from a career
Yes.
advancement perspective,
Yes.
there's just this narrow-minded, limited point of view. And to circle all the way back to the value of social data, right? We hit on the fact that it's the most real-time, deep information source you're ever going to have access to. There's no decision the institution is making that wouldn't benefit from being anchored in real-time data. So it's taking that opportunity to make sure you're proactively building that education. It's not going to happen overnight. So the longer we wait, the more limited we are for, unfortunately, an extended period of time. And that's not just to the impact of the social team. It all comes down to the impact the university could be making and the connection you could have with your university.
Yeah, you have to be your biggest advocate. Like,
True.
Yeah.
So true.
yeah, show what you're doing right. Share
And
it.
Jenny, to your point before around the education, I think that's one thing that we hear so frequently is sometimes you will have a social manager and they are waiting for someone to come ask them for data, but sometimes leadership is looking at social from purely an awareness perspective or purely like pretty pictures of campus or what students are doing on campus, and they're not seeing it from these other lenses of something that prospective students are going to decide which school they want to go to, or alumni are going back to see what's actually happening on campus. Is this something I want to give money to? There's so many of these other areas that social is impacting, and unless you as the social manager are providing that data and those stories to leadership, they might still just be looking at it from that sort of one track mind of what social used to be. When we first started posting on Instagram of our pretty pictures of campus, right?
Exactly. It is actually it's a tool. It's a tangible recruitment tool. It's a donation tool. It is a tool that has become more sophisticated. So, Hattie, if are there ways Tara, Hattie, are there things that you're seeing higher ed social media managers do well?
Yes, for sure. There are so many things, and those stories, I think, are where we're seeing social managers really thrive when they are sharing social data. And I usually frame this in context and consistency as sort of the two biggest drivers of showing the impact on social. I think context comes into play, where I think all social managers, really all marketers, I'm sure, can relate to spending a ton of time pulling together a report of everything you've done for the last semester, let's say, and you send it off to leadership and they come back and they say, is this good? Did we do well? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's happened to everybody. It's my biggest nightmare because you as the social manager, as the expert, know this data inside out. You know exactly
Right.
what it means. You know what our top performing post really meant, what our bottom performing post meant. But when we send this out to leadership, they're not as ingrained in social as we all are. So we really need to start telling some data stories around what does this actually mean to leadership. So instead of just looking at like, this was our number of our impressions or these were our number of clicks, I think we can start to frame that as, is our click-through rate contributing to higher campus tour registrations? Or is our impressions on our engineering content contributing to higher brand awareness for our STEM-related programs? So those are the sort of shifts that we can start making while applying some context to these numbers to make sure that our data is actually meaning something when it hits the desk of our leadership.
Totally. And, I always include averages. I think people should just integrate this in their reporting. So say I'm trying to show that some content did really well. And I'll say this got this many impressions or this many engagements. And I will always add, for example, our average post gets this many. So they can see how much better it performed than perhaps an average post, right?
Yeah. Definitely. And then I think on the other side, that consistency, and we talked a little bit about this already with not waiting for someone to ask you for data. We need to be sharing these successes on an ongoing basis, and sharing your success needs to become a regular thing. I think sometimes we feel maybe a little intimidated about saying how great we are and how great we're doing. But I always think about it when I look back to when I was a little kid. I forced my parents to read me the same story before bed every single night. So much so that all these years later, I can still just recite that story by heart, because that's what makes stories memorable, is consistency. So we need to make our social data super consistent so it's becoming memorable to our leadership, because we don't want it to fall by the wayside. We don't want it to just be looked at as pretty pictures of campus. We really want to make this super consistent. So we need to find an efficient way, because we know you have a million other things on your plate besides just sharing out social data. So I think finding an efficient way to share data is super important. So with Sprout, we do that with things like automated reports or live links. But we know some folks don't have access to a tool. So I think other things that we've heard can be really impactful is just a reminder on your calendar once a week to send at least one insight. Doesn't have to be a full report. Maybe it's just one insight out to leadership of a top performing post. Maybe even it's a bottom performing post, right? Saying, hey, we posted this and it didn't quite work. We're going to pivot this way for next week. Can also be in your team meeting once a week of just making it a point to walk through some of those social insights. Doesn't have to be a full report where you're spending hours and hours pulling it all together to send it through, but just making sure that sharing that data is consistent, that someone knows, hey, if they come to you and they do ask for data, you're going to have some good insights, or whenever they see you around campus, you're going to have something interesting to share with them about what's going on.
I love that. Always be ready with your elevator pitch for social data. I love that. Can I ask, what was the bedtime story?
Oh, the places you'll go.
What a good one.
That is
good one.
That's so precious.
One. I love that. I love that so much. So tell me some of the ways that you've seen social media managers get really creative with social data.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot more creativity around even things like influencers, of tapping into influencer data, unique social metrics. So getting outside of just things like your standard impressions or your engagement rate, of like tailoring an engagement rate to what engagement means to you. I think one story that always sticks out to me, and I always love to shout out Gettysburg College, they are using social data in a really unique way that I just love. They are using Sprout. They're using the tagging structure within Sprout. So if anyone's not familiar with that, it's just a way that we help segment out different topics or campaigns of social data. So you can think about it like at the end of your Giving Day campaign, you can just pull a report to see how did your Giving Day content perform. And that's really the biggest use case that we see when it comes to tagging, of helping pull reports based off of an individual campaign or a topic. But Gettysburg is getting a little creative with our tagging, and they have student assistants and student interns that are helping them in their social team and their marketing team on a semester by semester basis, as I'm sure many social teams in higher ed do. And what they are actually doing is they're assigning a tag to each of their interns or student assistants each semester. So then at the end of the semester, each student essentially has a portfolio of all of the content that they've worked on and hard metrics to say, I drove this many clicks out to the Gettysburg website, or I had a whatever percent engagement rate on all of the content that I created. Because I think so many of us can look back to something like an internship or our first role in social, and it was so hard to say, like, what was my impact? What did I actually do? So for these students, they're using that tag report to give them that portfolio and to give them those really like hard, tangible things that they can take into the workforce to say, like, this is what I did for my university.
Oh, I love that idea. I feel like a lot of us are going to start doing that now.
It's my favorite.
I hope so, because that's such a huge thing when we're thinking about like universities on social. It comes back to like that opportunity piece, right? Not only for internally the social team, but for students. And what a better, I couldn't think of a better way to really merge the two than something like that.
No, I love that. It's super helpful, and hopefully will encourage more people to work for your office, right? When they know that they're doing for you. I love that. I can't let you go without asking the question I like to ask everyone at the end of our conversation. But maybe, Tara, we'll start with you. What is your confession?
That was something we had to think long and hard about, Hattie. There's so much we could confess. Just kidding. I mean,
that's with all of us, right? Yeah.
True. The biggest thing from a social related confession is I actually have a timer on my social media to be really intentional with my scrolling. I think as we've talked about data in this conversation, right, there's information overload. So just like social media managers have to put workflows in place to stay organized and stay focused, I try to do the same. So not only do I have a timer, but I actually have on the personal side of the house not paid attention to TikTok any longer, because I found myself particularly getting stuck on the personal side of the house in a bit of doom scrolling, I think the kids call it.
Okay. So is the timer on your phone?
The timer's on my phone.
Okay. And are you good about stopping when the timer?
So I'm good about stopping,
alarms.
And I will out myself to say it was an iterative process. I started with a 15-minute timer, and I don't know who I thought I was or what space I thought I worked in, but needless to say, the 15 minutes just flew right by.
Goes by too fast.
too fast. So you're clicking ignore, and it's, I guess, reminding you that at least you're on it, but certainly not serving the purpose. So I've upped it to the realistic of 1 hour, and that's something where some days we don't even hit it because we work in social media. Usually you use the majority of that time, of course, for work, but leaves a small sector for the personal side of the house.
I like it. And thank you for your transparency. Thanks for sharing that.
Of course.
Hattie, what's your confession?
All right. So working at Sprout, we are very lucky that we have access to Sprout tools at our fingertips.
That's true.
That I sometimes use for my personal benefit.
I love it.
Over the course of the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, I did have a social listening topic running in the background that I would look at to look for Easter eggs, to track her outfits, to see what Travis was up to. I was just really deep in the Taylor Swift weeds, especially, shameless plug, I suppose, for Sprout social listening. It tracks Reddit conversations as well. So instead of doing a ton of doom scrolling on Reddit to see all of that conversation, I was just pulling all of that Reddit into this Eras Tour Taylor Swift social listening topic. And I probably doom scrolled in that topic quite a bit as well, because there were so many fun little insights there. But
it was focused
that is my confession.
data.
Yes, exactly.
I feel like that's more of a hobby than doom scrolling.
Yeah, exactly.
I do have a couple of things. We had a parent on the podcast, and he did say that his son looked on Reddit to find information about his college that he currently goes to. So that is a great, I would say, great helpful feature. And two, Hattie, can you share an Easter egg? Because I know we have lots of Taylor Swift fans in our listeners. So can you share an Easter egg? Or maybe
try to think. I feel like all of them ended up being kind of busted, like myth busted, that none of them actually came true. I think everyone was waiting for Reputation, Taylor's version, to drop at some point. So every concert, someone was saying, like, the clock was at this time, that means it's coming this time next week. And then it never happened. So it was a hobby, but it was a bit of a destructive hobby, because I was always waiting for something big to happen because of all of these quote unquote Easter eggs that didn't actually end up being Easter eggs, unfortunately.
I mean, we all need to be distracted these days with something that makes us happy.
And you can't say destructive, Hattie. There's so many Swifties internally at Sprout. Community bonding is how you have to twist it. And Jenny, the last thing that I will say to your point, that a student did do quite a bit of research on Reddit, I think that puts a perfect bow on this entire conversation, right? Students are using social, and so are their families, as a primary information source. So when we keep that in mind, that's why the impact of social is evolving and changing so much and becoming so much more dominant than it ever had the opportunity to before for our social teams and social media managers. So that's why we think social data is so important.
Well said, Tara. I couldn't agree more. I've learned so much. Thank you so much for the tips. And, I really appreciate you all coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. This was great.
This was so great. We really appreciate it.
Confessions of a Higher Ed Social Media Manager is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Jamie Hunt, Allison Tercio, Mallory Wilsey, and so many others of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.